I don't have the screen up right now. I just got my package up. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Adoption of the minutes, Monday, December the 6th, 2021. Moved and seconded.
I'll second it, and I want to say, Ellen, great job. You're very detailed in your minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, very much so. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you. And any business arising from those minutes?
As always, Mr. Chair, I do.
Of course you would.
I want to go down to these great minutes that Ellen Katani takes care of.
Mm-hmm.
It's about Brown requested that lot sizes and signs provisions be included under new business.
Great.
That's about the lot size. I'm just wondering if we can invite Aaron staff at the planning board meeting or planning committee meeting to discuss his ideas about providing more affordable housing by reducing the size of lot sizes for secondary and garden suites.
Terry, it's Alex. Your worship, maybe Terry and I will have a conversation after this meeting about setting up the meeting for January, and we'll see if we can get that on and get Aaron there. I mean, I'll defer to Terry on that, but
you just took the words out of my mouth. I figured that'd be the best thing to do is if you want to figure out when to fit it in, but I would assume sooner the better.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, just on that, on the 199 Grafton Street application, I know it's going to IRAC for the 27th and the 28th of January. Mm-hmm. At that same meeting that you're talking about the secondary apartments and garden suites, looking at the lot sizes, could we also discuss that issue?
Yeah, sure. I don't have a problem with that.
Is that all it was?
I was just good with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Okay, any other business arising? Yes. If not, we'll move into reports. 6A is 1 Weymouth Street, PID 325430, 825950, and 841528. I believe, Emily, you've got the floor.
Hi there, folks. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Sorry about that. All right, and hopefully you can see my slide deck up here now, labeled 1 Weymouth Street. Folks can see that as well? Great. So what I have before you folks today is a major variance request that was submitted by the 2023 Canadian Host Society and the Sheraton Harbour Authority, and that is to temporarily permit a cultural hub at 1 Weymouth Street for a period of 14 days from February 18th to March 5th, 2023. The proposed cultural hub would include entertainment, active recreation, eating and drinking establishments, which are currently prohibited on the property under the port zoning that applies. So it does include 3 parcels, and I have the identifiers there for you. Now, to flip through, so under Regulation 3.9.1 of the Zoning and Development Bylaw, major variance, the process can be applied to building and development permit applications that involve a temporary use in a manner otherwise prohibited by this bylaw for a period of no longer than 1 year. So that's how this request got before you today. And just to give you, kind of familiarize you with these parcels, which you may already be quite familiar with, it includes One Weymouth Street includes Port Sheraton commercial marine facility. So hopefully you can see my name hovering over it here. That includes the Seaport Terminal building, and I have a photo of that in the top right as well. Just to remind you, it also includes Port Sheraton surface parking, and then you can see it in the bottom right image there. Outdoor storage facility that's mainly for aggregates that are delivered to the port by commercial marine vessels. So all three parcels are owned by Sheraton Harbor Authority, and they're just located to the south of Water Street at the terminus of Sam McPherson Way and Weymouth Street there. The properties, as I mentioned earlier, are zoned port zone, and they're located within the city's 500 lot area. And just to point out to you folks quickly too, there's some notable properties among others in the surrounding area. There's 8 Sam McPherson Way, for instance, up to the northwest, which is occupied by a recently constructed 3-story non-residential building that is the location of the Epterick Assembly of Councils. There's also a property that I visit far too often, Receiver Coffee, there to the northwest. There is Farmers Food Hall to the west there as well, which, as you folks are aware, includes outdoor seating and fire pits, small coffee space, patio, and boardwalk space as well. There's also 2 condominium buildings, one held 4th Street and 4 Prince Street. They're about 3 stories each. We also have the Seaport Marina there, of course, the Hillsborough River to the south, and then HMCS Queen Charlotte facilities are to the northeast as well. So that gives you a kind of an orientation of the site and the surrounding area as well. So, as required by the zoning bylaw, we issued a notice of this variance request to owners of properties within 100 meters. We didn't receive any comments through the notification process, but we wanted to note that we did receive a letter of support from PEI Mi'kmaq Holdings Inc. So they own the Epterick Assembly of Councils building at 8 Sam McPherson Way. And that letter was submitted together with the variance request from the Sheraton Harbor Authority and the 2023 Canada Coast Society. And a copy of that letter is in the attachment part of your report. So just a quick summary of our analysis. We wanted to note that peak activity on the property usually occurs, in typical pre-COVID times between May and October. That's when there's usually a higher frequency of cruise ships and commercial marine vessels arriving to the port. And that's also when tourism is typically in full operation there. And this information was confirmed by the Sheraton Harbor Authority. And we note that there's minimal activity typically between November and April. So it's our understanding that the temporary cultural hub wouldn't conflict with any existing uses on the property between that February and March period where they're proposing the event to take place. Also, just from a zoning perspective, you can see on the zoning map highlighted in yellow, properties to the west of the port zone are zoned waterfront. So again, that's the yellow area there. So places like the Epterick Assembly of Council, Receiver Coffee, Farmers Hall, they're all zoned waterfront. And entertainment, eating, and drinking establishment uses are permitted on waterfront zone properties. So the 2023 Canada Game Host Society is proposing to extend this cultural hub into the waterfront zone. There's a concept there in your package of kind of the preliminary plan for this extension. The cultural hub, we feel, is compatible with these existing uses to the west. And we therefore feel that it's appropriate on a temporary basis. However, given that there are those residential dwellings in close proximity, particularly to the north and northwest and west, We are recommending that this event strictly comply with municipal and provincial regulatory requirements such as the nuisance bylaw, liquor licensing, etc. Just to ensure there's no sort of impact on those residential properties. And I just wanted to note that we did circulate the various requests to other city departments for comment as well, including economic development, tourism, and events. And we're fortunate to have Wayne on the line with us today, who I welcome to hop in if he has anything to add here. But that department did note that the city is a major funding partner for the Games, with the $1.8 million investment plan for it. The city is expecting to receive infrastructure upgrades as part of the event, specifically to the Bella Line Center and Eastland Center. And the Economic Development, Tourism and Events Department is recommending that the event organizers work directly with their department and just make sure they comply with the city's event guideline requirements, which is administered by their department as well. It was circulated as well to the fire department, and they're recommending that in cultural hub plans be circulated not just to fire but to other city departments like police services, public works, parks and recreation, etc., for review and comment prior to implementation. Just once their plans are more solidified, that we can just double check that it meets all city requirements. Parks and Recreation did review as well, and they had no concerns with the preliminary plans that the applicant put forward. So in light of this, our department is recommending approval of the proposed cultural hub for the proposed February 18th to March 5th time period, subject to permit approval for any temporary structures like tents or signage. And that's just under our zoning bylaw requirements. Coordination as recommended with the city's Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Events to ensure compliance with applicable regulations, provincial and municipal, and city event guideline requirements as well. And then as recommended by FAR that any cultural hub plans be circulated to other city departments for review and comment prior to implementation. So that kind of summarizes my presentation, folks. If you have any questions or comments, please bring them forward. And I believe we have a representative from the Harbor Authority and the 2023 Canadian Coast Society with us on WebEx 3 too. So if you have questions for them, please bring those forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Very well done. An awful lot to be said there. So is there any of our guests would like to say a few words, or would you like me just to go to questions?
Mr. Chair, it's Wayne. If I could just say a couple of quick words.
Sure.
As a staff, we've been working with Canada Games for well over a year now on this particular file as well as others, so we have a good handle on the proposed cultural hub venue. The Games are going to be a huge coup to the capital city, not only from economic and tourism perspective, but as well as lasting legacies and impacts on our residents as a whole. This particular request has been to the Economic Development, Tourism and Events Committee already, and thus has been recommended to come forward to this committee. Planning staff has been phenomenal to work with on this file to date. And I'd say two final things. Although nothing to this extent, but in the past, special variances have been permitted to other events such as the East Coast Music Awards and or the Jack Frost Winterfest or similar in the past. And the final thing I would say is I'd share the city's internal logistics committee, which is representatives from all city departments. So I would serve as the conduit for this to be communicated down to each and every department. We see this as a highly valuable event and a huge win for the municipality.
Thank you very much, Wayne. It is comforting just knowing the fact that you're involved, because the events is your gig, and it's good to see that you're working hard along with all the departments to bring this forward, because it's a wonderful thing for the city. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Anybody else got anything they want to add, or any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Just on the site, as Wayne knows, the site has evolved over the years as a cultural hub at the Confederation Landing. Lots of events took place down there. So we just have to keep in mind that there are hours of operation to be conducive with the neighborhood, because as Wayne knows, and I know the councillor from the area, Councillor Yankoff, there are times when it goes on too far, so just keep that in mind that we've taken this route before, so we've learned from the past and we'll use those past events to guide us in the future.
Thank you very much for bringing it up. Yes, most of that is in the Lana's ward, Councillor Hancock's ward 1. But I also get quite a few calls, up on the early part of my ward there. It's, we did find out, like you said, in years past, such things as liquor licenses and all that stuff's got to be done, and bylaws and things have to be respected for sure. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Councillor, just add quickly in relation to His Worship's comments, the nuisance bylaw with governance, the curfews with respect to the hours of operation, and the Liquors Act will serve us well under any beverage service. I think it's important to note any of the louder activities such as music. As an example, the concerts would be held indoor at the Seaport Event Center. They wouldn't actually be outside.
Oh, yeah. That's better, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for clearing that up, Mike. Any other, Councillor Hancock?
Great, thank you, Chair. And I do believe that Emily mentioned that letters had went out, so the residents in the area are well aware that this is coming. Is that correct, Emily?
That's correct. Yeah, it's required by our zoning bylaw. It goes out to owners of properties within 100 meters of the boundaries of the properties we're looking at. Yes.
But I don't think Councillor Yankoff that would go like up to Houston Street or go that far. I think it would only be the immediate area, probably across on Weymouth or the opposite side of the street, probably. Head up toward Houston, I don't think those would be covered, but I think that's the mayor said,
Do you think, Chair, that as the time gets closer, we have our communications department get that information out there so that it does get up to all of the residents within that huge area?
Yeah, and we'll be probably banging on some doors as well.
And it's a great event. It's going to be part of the 2023 Canada Games. Mr. Yankoff said that 100 meters, that only probably goes up to maybe King Street on the north side, and maybe to the Abergwit Assembly of Council. So, and if you go to the west, there's apartment buildings and rented properties. They don't get the letters. These only go to property owners. So you have to get the word out. But a great event, just like what we've learned in the past. Let's use that going towards this event in the future.
Good. Thank you very much. Any other discussion on Weymouth Street? I see none. I think, is there any? No? Okay. Sorry?
Hi, sorry. Thank you for this, Mr. Chair. It's Kate Brayton Stewart with the Canada Games. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank you all for taking the time to discuss this and all the work that went into the recommendation. And I just wanted to reiterate that we're very aware and want to make sure we fit within the bylaws, like the nuisance bylaws and closing events at a certain time. And we're going to be working very closely, like Wayne said, with the city. And so we want to do this perfectly and meet your goals and or exceed your goals and really bring a great event to the capital city.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time as well. It's a big endeavor, and we're only too glad to be part of it, so thank you very much. Thank you. Any other comments or concerns? If not, I'll probably ask for a motion to go with staff's recommendation. So I need a motion and a seconder.
I will.
A second.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. All those in favor of, major variance request to temporarily permit Canada Games Cultural Hub to happen, please raise your hand. Everybody's up, good. Okay. Did you get that, Ellen?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And for those that came, Faith and Wayne, thank you very much for your comments. We'll move on to the, second, 60, the rezoning, 85 Malt, Road, PID 3881. And I believe, Robert, you got this one?
That's correct, Mr. Chair, I do. Can everyone hear me?
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy New Year, folks. So we're starting it off with 85 Malpec Road. It's an official plan redesignation and a rezoning and a lot consolidation. And the intent is basically to change the zone from single-attached residential to institutional, and to change the official plan designation from institutional, from low-density residential to institutional. So, there we go. I think, can everyone see that now?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so moving forward, this is a separate property highlighted in red. Currently, it's vacant with a parking lot for overflow vehicles. You can actually see the current state of the lots right now. So basically, this is the subject lot here, and then this is the care home that's situated adjacent to the existing lot, which is at 73 Malpec Road. And the idea is to consolidate this lot with the 73 Malpec Road property in order to allow for the addition of the existing care home. As you can see, that is basically the property. To the north, you have the cottages, and then to the south is the care home. And then, of course, to the west, you have low-density residential dwellings on Traynor Street. This is the proposed site plan that shows the expansion of the existing care facility onto the subject property, as well as the expansion of the existing parking lot to accommodate the additional spaces required for the proposal. So the comments that we received from Public Works was that since it's adjacent to a collector street, it's controlled, and therefore a requirement would be to remove the existing access on the subject property, and that would mean that if the lot was consolidated with the actual parent parcel here at 73 Malpec, access would be obtained off the existing access on that property. So this one would be closed and restored to the owners at the owner's expense, and we received no comments from Charlottetown Police as of yet. So with that being said, considering that this is rezoning and an official plan redesignation, it requires public consultation, and given the comments we received thus far, and we are recommending that proceed to public consultation for feedback. And I believe that the applicant's representative, Greg McDougall, is online to answer any questions that the board might have in regards to the application and development. And as well as I'm on hand as well to speak to that. So if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert. Before I just open up the questions, Greg, did you want to just introduce it? Anything you want to say before we have questions?
I think he's muted.
No. You might be,
the aging demographic and the growing need.
Turn up your volume. Greg, turn up your volume. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
no?
Can't hear you.
Very brief. You can hear muffled.
Yeah.
Really low, it's a low volume, Greg.
Yeah.
What's going on with that? But, yeah. Good comment.
very hard to hear you, Greg.
I have a quick clarification question, am I allowed to ask it?
Yes, you sure can go right ahead, Councilor McKay.
So, when I read the report, it looks like Roberts, they will not have access back on it. We're not gonna ruffle Trainer Street residents again with this application at all, correct?
Good question.
Through the chair to Councilor McKay, that's correct. There would be no proposed access that would be running through to Trainer Street. So the only access would be from the existing subject, well, the adjacent parcel which the subject would be consolidated with, which would be 73 Malpeck Road.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McKay. So, Robert, Public Works and police have both entertained this project and had no problems.
So we received, the only comments we received from Public Works was that they had no concern as long as the existing approach on the subject property is closed and restored, and then basically the parking lot would then be accessed through the interior lot at the adjacent parcel of 73 Malpeck, which has the care home. So that is the comments we've just received from Scott, and police have not yet commented on the proposed approach or access. But given that they would be closing an existing approach or access off of a main collector or arterial, that would actually be beneficial and it would actually improve the traffic situation along that area.
I think Mr. Adams there in Public Works and the police work close in hand with these. It's almost more Public Works than it is police anyway. But I'm sure if there was something, they'll definitely add into it. I'm sure. Any other questions, concerns? Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chair, just referring to the image that's on the screen right now, 85 Malpeck Road. So, will we be increasing the size of the entrance egress that lies in front of the existing Andrews of Sheraton? Will you increase the exit or entrance to that facility?
Good question. Robert?
According to the submitted plans that we received, there was no increase to the access on 73 Malpeck, which has the care home facility on it. You know, I don't see why there'd be a particular reason why, since, you know, any traffic leaving going the site, it's already two-way, but perhaps the applicant, this is online, you could answer that question.
Can you hear me okay now?
We got you out, Greg.
Better today, adjusted my settings here. So, apologize for that. So our future plan would be from expansion of this facility. We are near capacity, and we don't necessarily have a timeline in place, but certainly we need to get the lot rezoned to institutional. Right now, we feel it would be sufficient entrance exit already. We have a service entrance to the left of our lot, and then we have the main general public entrance at the center. If in fact we need to expand that, we are open to catering that, the width of that entrance. But yes, that spare lot, the exit would be blocked off completely.
Oh, great. Sure, can I just ask?
Sure.
The proposed expansion for Andrews of Charlottetown. I'm just looking at the sketch here, and I know it's just a sketch, but it backs up into the homes on Trainer Street. And I think your setback, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, the setback on the backyard would be 19 feet from the closest property line. So my first question, Greg, is that what's the proposed development? Is it a 100,000 square feet, 50,000 square feet, 20,000? Just want to.
It would be about, I believe, 50,000 square foot expansion. The requirement is we're 25 feet from the property boundary, so we're far in exceed of our minimum setbacks, and that could be even further from the residential homes. We have one layout, we're back and forth with two different layouts right now, but yeah.
Just last question, Mr. Chair. So the height would be the same, correct? You know, going up 2 stories, 3 stories?
That's correct. So the back of the building is single story. This expansion would be a 2-story addition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you very much. Any other comments or concerns or questions? Okay, pretty good, Dave.
Mr. Chair, I just had a question. I'm wondering if the folks on Trainer Drive will get notification of the public meeting?
Right. I think, I'll let Robert answer that, Bob, yes.
Hello. So through the chair, yes, basically one of the requirements is that we do circulation for any rezoning application. So we would basically send letters to any property that falls within 100 meters of the boundary of the subject lot. So those would include the lots on Trainer Street, as well as notification goes into the local paper.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Is that good, Rosemary?
Yes, thank you very much, Robert.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments, concerns, questions? I see none, so I guess, as is the request, I'll need a motion to move this to a public meeting, if everyone chooses to do so, move it, please.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Mason, seconded by?
Basil?
By who?
Basil?
Oh, Basil. Okay, Basil, thank you very much. All those in favor of, proceeding to a public consultation?
I'm just not sure who moved it.
Moved by the mayor, I believe.
Okay.
And seconded by Basil, Mr. Hamlet. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? And anyone against? I see none. Okay, Ellen, you got that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Greg, very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck. We'll see you at the public meeting.
Okay, thanks. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to you. Bye-bye. Okay, others, which would be C, the short-term rental regulatory framework. So in front of you there, in your package, you see that it's quite a detailed description. I just want to remind everybody that this decision we're going to make here isn't the end at all. We need to have council take a serious look at this, and to get to council, we need to have a motion. So I'll let Robert probably speak a little bit more on this, but I guess what I'm just saying is that, you know, there's going to be a lot of consultation happen with this going forward. It's nowhere near done. There's a lot of work by planning to be done, but they do need the guidance from us and council. So, Robert, you've got it.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask one question?
Sure can.
So the timeline, what are you looking at for timeline? Today is January 4th, are we looking at bringing it forward in February to council to vote on, March?
Well, I think whatever we do, which will probably be anywhere between, I'd say by the end of February probably. But, you know, again, it'll go back to the planning staff. There's a tremendous amount of work yet to be done. But, you know, staff need to have some indication that we're all on the same page. So that's the process we're going through here today. But yes, within the next 2 months, yes.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Robert, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so I'll get right to it. Staff is proposing a couple of recommendations. As the planning board chair alluded to, the regulations and the recommendation going forward tonight to planning board is just the rules around how someone can operate a short-term rental. So that's essentially all that is before the board tonight. When we start looking at licensing or registration requirements, that would require its own separate bylaw, which would have to come in separately in the preceding months, as well as the enforcement bylaw. So for tonight only, we're basically looking at the rules that would govern someone that could operate a short-term rental within the city of Charlottetown. So that's what we're looking at. Before you is just kind of additional items that staff will have to work on, and also this board as well as council will have to make a determination on, particular the registration, licensing, and enforcement components. But there's other items in here as well. We do have costs recovered through accommodation fees. That was looking at building permit and licensing registration. I believe staff is still intending to, if we go forward with the new regulations, we would be approving any short-term rental under the home occupation requirements, which we have been doing for the last number of years. So basically, tonight we're looking at the regulations. So to start things off, we look towards the official plan amendments. So the first OP amendment is discussing how short-term rentals can be accommodated within Charlottetown's neighborhoods. And so this policy is basically to ensure that an STR that's operating in the residential area is restricted to that operator host principal residence. And that's just to ensure that it cuts down on the commercialization of short-term rentals, keeps these private residential dwellings within the long-term housing stock, and is intending to keep the character of the surrounding neighborhood compatible. So there has been some issues that we've received from residents within neighborhoods where some of these operations appear to be commercially operated since they're rented out full-time, full year, and we've been receiving complaints of nuisances in regards to noise, garbage, and parking. So that's basically the intent of the first official plan policy. The second policy just would, again, ensure that any STR would have to register and be licensed by both the province, PI Tourism, and the City of Charlottetown. So it takes 2 concurrent approvals in order to legally operate a short-term rental. Again, this is nothing particularly new. This has been a requirement in our home occupation requirements in the zoning bylaws since at least 2006, if not before that. But this is just clarifying it within the official plan. Now jumping on to the actual zoning bylaw, so we're moving away from the official plan to the zoning bylaw. So this gets into the more particular details of the rules that would regulate short-term rentals. And so for the first amendment, we're proposing that either a secondary or a garden suite could be used for the purpose of short-term rental under the conditions that the host and operator is present in the main part of the dwelling during the time of stay. The next proposed amendment is defining the particular details of a tourist home, of a tourist accommodation. And so that's basically to allow anyone to rent out the private dwelling unit as long as it's principal residence, except for apartment dwelling units. And yes, that includes condominiums. We also have a regulation that either the entire dwelling unit can be rented. If that's the case, then the operator host doesn't have to be present at time of stay. So this would be more akin to a situation where someone has, say, a cottage on the North Coast. During the summer, they go to the cottage, and then they can rent out their private dwelling that they stay in the rest of the remainder of the year as a short-term rental. And then we have a maximum of 4 bedrooms that can be rented at one time. And again, just the operator does not have to be present at time of stay if the entire dwelling unit is being rented to one party of guests. So for the parking requirements, we've added parking requirements specifically for the bed and breakfast, the Sheraton, or a hostel, which are also tourist accommodations, but it would be separate from a short-term rental of private residence, which we would now classify as a tourist home. So based on practices we've researched, 2 spaces is usually the minimum. That's because since it's the operator's primary residence, they need a parking space for themselves, and they would need a parking space for their guests. If they were away and renting out the entire dwelling unit, then they would have 2 spaces minimum. For some concerns we received during the public consultation was that for properties in the downtown 500 lot area where there's a lack of on-site parking, so say a dwelling unit never had on-site parking and they primarily use off-street parking, we would defer to section 44.21B of the bylaw. Basically, if the proposed use doesn't result in a renovation greater than 4,200 square feet, which we don't expect any STR operation within our regulatory framework to do so, then they would be exempted from providing additional parking. Lastly, we have classified definitions. So the booking definition is it's going to be related and tied back into the registration licensing bylaw that staff will be bringing forward to this board and to council and the public in the months coming. We've also defined what a principal residence means. This is very important since this principal residence requirement will continue on defining clearly in the zoning bylaw what a principal residence is, as well as that would be used in the licensing/registration bylaw as well. So that's essentially to ensure that anyone that's renting out the private residence, we would check to ensure that that's their primary residence. They wouldn't be, if they had multiple residences, they wouldn't be able to short-term rental out multiple residents. They would have to keep to their primary address, and we would have that through taxation records as well as other records we can gain access to. We've also identified that it has to be a natural person and cannot be a corporation. So that's one thing that has been commonplace in a lot of STR regulations across the country, is that they're defining principal residence as a natural person, not a corporation. And again, that cuts back on the commercialization where we see private dwellings being bought up by corporations and converted into long-term hotels. We have the short-term rental definition, as well as the tourist accommodation, and then finally the tourist home. Now, the STR definition is pretty clear on defining what would constitute a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. Tourist accommodation basically could be a number of things, such as a bed and breakfast, a hostel, tourist home, even a heritage inn, and a hotel motel are separate uses. So again, we're defining what a tourist accommodation is under the home occupation provision. We define that the use of a private residence for short-term rental is classified and will be classified as a tourist home. This is in line with the Provincial Tourism Act because they do define, or at least allude to, what a tourist home means, and that is the short-term rental of a private residence. So we're just going to be building off of that and just clearly defining that an STR in the city of Charlottetown will now be considered a tourist home. Now, this has been something that we've been receiving lots of correspondence on and questions, and it's regarding the legal non-conforming nature of tourist accommodations. This is something certainly that a lot of the operators, even during the public consultation period, has requested clarification on. So staff is presenting the following our position. So since at least 2006, and I actually have copies of bylaws that even precede that back into post-amalgamation. The zoning bylaw has always contained regulations for a resident who wanted to use their private dwelling for a tourist accommodation. So essentially this is basically a short-term rental, because that's what a short-term rental is. So essentially, for the legal non-conforming nature of tourist accommodations, the rules have always been as follows. The operator proprietor of the home occupation shall live in the dwelling, so that's the home occupation requirement. So that has always been a requirement. You have to live in the actual dwelling that you're renting out short term. It was only ever permitted in a single detached dwelling. It was only allowed for up to 4 bedrooms to be used under the tourist accommodation. It had to be licensed under the Tourism Industry Act. There could be no kitchen or cooking appliances permitted in the guest room, no meals and breakfast are provided to guests, and parking and signage was subject to regulations of the bylaw. So this is the existing rules as they were today. These rules have been in place in the bylaw since at least 2006, like I've mentioned. So that is kind of how we would define what a legal non-conforming tourist accommodation or a short-term rental would be in a private residence. Now, we looked at the permit records, and since 1998, the department has received 54 home occupations, so that's tourist accommodation applications that consist of renting out someone's private residence to bed and breakfasts to a heritage inn. Of those 54 home occupations, 31 applications were approved. In 2021, there were 10 home occupation tourist accommodation applications for the rental of a private dwelling unit for an STR purpose. The department approved 6 of those applications so far. Other applications were either rejected because they did not meet the requirements that I stated here above. So often they were either apartments, so they didn't meet the dwelling unit type, which is only single detached dwelling, or it wasn't the operator's principal residence. It was a secondary residence that they had that they wanted to rent out. So there is a clear history here of the department approving operations that complied with the bylaw and rejecting those that did not. Now, the public feedback. This is an extraordinary amount of public feedback we received. This is probably one of the most consultations we've done as a department since we hosted 2 public consultations at the Confederation Center in May and November of 2021. Going through the over 120 emails and written correspondence and phone calls, we have designed common themes that have emerged from there, and just some common themes that we've heard throughout all of this consultation work was concerns expressed by residents and community organizations about the quality, health, safety of private sector rental housing used for STRs. Mostly that's in regards to older properties between the downtown 500 lot area that have been taken and converted over into short-term rentals. We've had some concerns of stricter regulations, requirements for STR operators and hosts, and that was mainly the regulations that we were putting forward and that we're putting forward tonight. We had the emergence of a lot of STR properties being converted to STRs after the invention or at least proliferation of Airbnb or Expedia, VRBO. Those started to impact private market housing availability and affordability, as well as the generated land use implications, such as the compatibility issue of the commercial nature of STRs in residential neighborhoods, nuisances, and that's noise, garbage, and parking, as well as property standards and maintenance. Another theme was the call for fair regulations to even the playing field. That's in place for licensed and appropriately zoned hotels, motels, and a lot of traditional bed and breakfasts like heritage inns. And then lastly, there was confusion regarding the existing provincial licensing process and the municipal approval requirements. So as everyone knows, the province has been issuing licenses to some of these STR operators. However, they did so without validating or confirming that the municipality, which has jurisdiction over all land use matters through the zoning bylaw, to confirm whether they were permitted or not to operate. Since that time, though, we have been in conversation with PI Tourism, and they are holding off issuing any new licenses without first obtaining confirmation approval through our office. So all that's to be said, when we categorized and collated all of the feedback based on scenario 1, which is staff's recommendation, what we took to the public consultation, the public meetings, as well as that we're bringing forward tonight, 57% of the total correspondence and feedback we received actually agree with staff's recommendation. There's 20% that disagreed with staff's recommendation, and then 23% that sought an alternative regulation. And some of that alternative regulation, if they weren't going for either scenario 1, if they were going for scenario 2, 3, 4, 5, or some other scenario, they would have been categorized into this category here, this alternative regulation. But by and large, when we went through the correspondence, it would seem that the public are overwhelmingly supportive of the regulations presented. We also received 2 petitions. STR operators objecting to the proposed regulations. There was 50 signatures that was sent to Mayor and Council. And then we had PI Fight for Affordable Housing, which supports either scenario 1 or 2, as long as the primary residence requirement. And there was over 920 signatures, and then of those, 620 were Charlottetown residents. So pretty substantive public feedback from that perspective. We also had external organization feedback, so Renting PI, Legal Information for Tenants and Landlords, supports the proposed regulations as they stand. We also received correspondence from the Hotel Association of Canada. They seem generally supportive of the regulations. However, the one primary feature they stated was that they support any regulation or any regulatory framework that has the principal residence requirements. And the principal residence means that if it's the owner's primary residence, they live there full time, then they can rent it as an STR. Then the City of Sheraton Affordable Housing Advisory Committee passed a resolution, a motion on October 19th. It was passed the second one in November, but it's essentially that they supported staff's recommendation as well as scenario or option 1 that was presented, and that's principal residence only, no apartments. The committee based that recommendation on the low vacancy rate and lack of long-term housing rental options. So, saying all of that, staff is just moving forward with the recommendations that we took to the public in November. We are now stating that that's our recommendation that we put forward. We do note that we will return in the preceding months with additional bylaws such as enforcement, summary proceedings, and then of course the registration bylaw for STRs to implement whatever direction council decides on, as well as including a proposed date when all these bylaw amendments will be in force and effect. And that's an important thing because there has been instances where municipalities have provided a 1-year grace period for operators to register and then be licensed in order to familiarize themselves with the rules. But that again would have to be decided by council and when they would want to actively apply the proposed regulations or if there were changes to be made. So saying all that, I can take any questions if there are any, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions, folks? I'm sure there is. Mr. Mayor.
Oh, okay, I'm next.
Oh, sorry, Judy, I didn't see your hand up, sorry.
No, Councilor McKay, you can go first.
Okay, go ahead, Judy.
I'll do it with Councilor McKay.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I have a lot of questions, but I'm just more trying to get my head around all this tonight. But first of all, you know, it's a fairly heavy topic, and the Zoom meeting for me is challenging enough without trying to talk about such big things. But I had to go through 6 points of questions. And one thing, you know, we talked about the difference between the provincial and the municipalities trying to come together, and I still think that there's some work to be done there before we kind of start moving ahead as a municipality. Myself, I believe we talked about perhaps trying to form some sort of a working group or something to kind of bring that a little bit closer. I feel like we're moving ahead here, but there's a lot of missing pieces that are going to cause us issues in the end if we don't kind of nip some of it in the bud. I guess my clarification point, when we talk about tourist homes, are the houses, some of these houses that we know are owned by people who have operated as short-term rentals, are they going to be able to turn any of those properties into tourist homes so that they're still able to use those as like rental properties or whatever they deem? Would be my first question. Are they allowed to own multiple tourist homes? And do you have to be owner occupied in the tourist home?
Through the chair to Councilor McCabe. So the definition of tourist home, as I stated, would be what we consider the rental of a private dwelling unit, and it would have to be your principal residence. So to answer your question, every resident can only rent out one tourist home. If you can't have multiple tourist homes, you would have to basically, because you can't have multiple primary residences, right? So essentially it would be stick to one only.
So then there's still the issue with the people that do have multiple properties, other than we were just saying at this point they can't have multiple properties, right?
Well, I would say that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to get my head around it, and I guess I'm looking at the number 2006. Why did we go back to 2006? Why is that date? Why is 2006? For me, and I think you know, it's unfortunate, but these people got ahead of us, and they put lots of money into these properties and stuff, and I think that for me, I'm not comfortable moving forward with anything until we've had a chance to get a little bit more opportunity for some discussion. And I guess we're just trying to get this to council, and I know council has to have more. It's a lot of information right now for me. And 2006, why that date?
Yeah. So 2006 is basically the last copy of the bylaw that actually permitted and had these specific rules, and I've thrown them back up on the screen. So since 2006, any operator, host, if they wanted to get approval from our office, this is the only way they would have been able to do it. They would have to satisfy those requirements. So one, they would have had to live in the dwelling unit that they're going to operate as an STR, like that's their full-time, that's a primary residence, and it was only permitted in a single detached dwelling. So there was not a situation where either you could rent out a duplex or an apartment. It was very clear since at least 2006 that you could only rent out a single detached dwelling as an STR. So for all those operators that have apartment units and they're renting it as STRs, that would not have conformed with the regulations of today. So, and the reason I throw the 2006 up is because I want to show both the board and the council that the city has, in one form or another, have regulated short-term rentals. The only reason that short-term rentals seem to be treated as new is just by the fact that Airbnb and VRBO and a lot of these sharing platforms have made it very convenient and easy for people to rent out their dwelling. So, you know, with proliferation of these STR platforms, these websites, has created almost, it seems like people see this new phenomenon, but it's always been there, right? It's similar to Auto Trader, right? There's always been car dealerships, but then Auto Trader came in and they created a giant website and they pulled all this aggregate information of all these dealer listings for anyone to go through and shop. It's the same thing that Airbnb, VRBO did, right? So I'm just trying to show that, you know, for at least, you know, over 15 years, the city of Charlottetown has had regulations for someone who wants to rent out a private dwelling unit. And if you decide not to rent out your private dwelling unit and you decided to do like a bed and breakfast, like a Heritage Inn, you could do that. But then you would still have to get approval through our office for a change of use, as well as building permit upgrades, right? Because there's code upgrades that come along with that too. So this has always been the case. You know, this has never really changed. And when I pull down to, you know, to the next screen, like we had since 1998, we've had 54 applications for these types of uses. And we have rejected some of them, and I've gone into the files, and they've been rejected because they didn't meet the principal dwelling requirement, so they weren't living there full time. This is just a secondary income property, or they wanted to rent something else other than a single detached dwelling.
No, that's great. Is that clarified? There was a lot of information coming. So we've kind of had a law, but nothing's really enforced or followed. Is basically what it from that standpoint.
Julie, it's Alex. The issue is that we've been attempting for years to work with the province has been giving their licensing, and we've been telling the province you need to check with the municipality before you issue a license. So a few years back, at least, you know, Robert may be able to clarify, at least 3 or 4 years back, we at least got them to write right on the application, you need municipal approval in tandem with the approval we're granting. But nobody came to us because either they knew that there may be an issue with that, or they just thought, well, we got the provincial approval, we're moving on. So we got left in a position where people were ignoring us, but the reality is what Robert is alluding to, that doesn't preclude the fact that we've always had rules. And there are those that are saying, well, we didn't have any rules, so we need to be grandfathered. But we did have rules, and we have been telegraphing this issue for quite some time that they need to get approval from us. So hopefully with your direction, council, we can clarify these things and clearly work with the province because the province is now taking position. They're not issuing any new licenses. unless they have written confirmation from the city that everything's aligned with our zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Alex, that's happening because the opposition in the Legislative Assembly pushed a bill to force the province to get municipalities to sign up. That didn't happen because of the kumbaya amongst provincial government officials. It was an act or an amendment that was passed in the Legislative Assembly, and it took 2 years to get royal assent. So, Alex, I know what Councillor McCabe is saying, because I've heard this also, that, you know, if we've had these regulations in since 2006 or 1998, why weren't we enforcing them? And if the back to 2006, that was because of the B&Bs, bed and breakfast homes, and I was on council at that time, and there was a lot of discussion, and a lot of the recommendations that we're looking at came from the chair of planning at the time, Kim Devine.
Yeah, well, look, it's a complicated issue, but until 2019 or 2020, I'm not sure, we had no way of knowing where these things were. They were sleepers in the community because they weren't asking us. So until we got the enforcement tool, which is it used to be, it's called Granicus now, but it's host compliance. Even the province didn't even know where these were. So, we're getting caught up with this issue. As Robert alluded to, everything just went online. So everybody was doing things online. They weren't getting the proper approvals. And what we're trying to do this evening is just clarify with you folks, how do you want to regulate it? And then when we get that direction, we'll come back to you with with a date, the time frame when you want to bring it into effect. We do think some kind of a grace period is going to be helpful. I mean, we are moving quickly into the new 2022 season for these regulators, and we think, and again, that's just a staff opinion, we work for you folks, but if you folks want to indicate what the rules are going to be for 2022, we can work with the province to sign off on what the new rules will be, but give the operators some time. This grace period could come in early in 2023 in regard to when they're going to have to be officially registered, licensed, and things like that. But we want a mechanism in place for 2022 to say, yes, you either comply with our new regulation or you don't comply. And that's the piece of it tonight, the zoning rules. Thank you, Your Worship.
Alex, it's Rosemary. I just had a question for either you or Robert, and I'm wondering how many short-term rental properties are there in the city which are non-complying with the regulation, with the guidelines that we've had since 2006?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Robert may have the specific numbers, but the problem was we were out in front of the province because we had the tool to find out where they were. All the province knew was who walked in the door and asked for a license. They didn't know who was operating an STR in the city that didn't ask for a license, and there was a lot more people operating without a provincial license or a municipal license. But we were able to determine, once we got the host compliance to find where these were located, we were the ones that indicated to the province that, look, you've got a lot of non-compliance as well. You're just relying on people who are volunteering to get a permit from you, but there's a lot that didn't. So they now have purchased the same tool that we have purchased to find out where they are. And then in order to enforce any bylaw, you have to evenly enforce the bylaw. So you have to know where these properties are so you can effectively enforce it. So we were the first to be able to highlight there was a lot of non-conformance in the city. We brought that to the province's attention. They've changed their legislation. They're using the same tool we're using to find them. I think at the peak of it, there was, back when we started this, there was up to over 700 listings that we saw, and Robert can clarify that, dropped down because of COVID. And but when COVID goes away and the tourist industry comes back, there'll likely be 400 or 500 of them, but maybe Robert can give some specific numbers on that.
Yes, so like today, if we look at the numbers today according to our software that we have, We have a little over 200 STRs that are non-compliant with the regulations. Now that has decreased substantially because we're in one of the lowest points of the year in terms of STR activity. As I've spoke to the board and council in the past, our peak times is between May and October. But Alice is correct in that there was at least over 638 types of listings, and again there was like around, I think it was around even 80% of that time was non-compliant. So again, these listings, the numbers change. They change on it could be a daily basis. We get weekly updates, but essentially the majority of the listings and the highest concentration of non-compliant STRs was occurring, of course, in the 500 lot area, and they still are. And that is mostly to do with the dwelling unit type, and that's how it's because apartment units are being rented out and used for short-term rentals rather than single detached dwellings. So those numbers fluctuate, but as of today, I'm looking at the screen. We have approximately a little over 200 that are non-compliant right now, and that is basically makes up about 87% of the total listings that are active right now in the city.
Thanks very much, Robert. And my main point actually around those numbers is just that it's a large, at the peak, it's 600 to 700 properties that are non-compliant. It's a very high number. And one of the key messages I heard at both public meetings is that the public is holding the city accountable to bringing some controls over this whole industry. So it's still a substantial number, and it needs attention for sure. So I think this is very important work, and Robert, I think you've done a great job at researching and bringing forward this framework. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, concerns at this point? Mr. Mayor?
Unless Councillor McKay, do you have anything else, Councillor McKay?
I do, but I'll let you first this time.
My favorite councillor, one of my favorite councillors. Mr. Chair, can I just go back to, in a briefing, it goes to public meetings. I don't know what happened here, but when you look at public meetings, it only states that we had 2 meetings. But you, Councillor McKay, Councillor Yankoff, and the rest of the council, remember, you recall that we met on June 19th, 2019, at the Memorial Hall. And that was a STR meeting. And you recall that some of the participants came with placards. It was a room full of they against, they for, they against, and but it's not referred to here in the public meetings, and I think that is a date that we first started off. And Mr. Chair, that led to our meeting of council on March 9th on 2020. This is just 4 days prior to the outbreak of the pandemic. And staff had recommended scenario 3, but I believe that was changed to scenario 4, option 4. So, and then we had to rescind that because we were going forward. So there are parts of this history that I think have to be documented so that anyone that reads it now into the future will realize that there was a lot of time and effort went into it. And just like Rosemary, I want to thank Robert Zilke and the staff at Planning and Development for, sticking this out, because some jurisdictions are just trying to find a way to keep kicking the can down the road. As Councillor McKay alluded to earlier, there's a lot of information. We've gone through a lot of meetings, both at the Planning Board, the Planning Committee, at Council, and the public meetings. So I just want the public record to reflect that we did have a meeting on June 19th, and Robert presented 5 options, which became 5 scenarios. So we really have, again, it's just to make sure that we have all the information in the documents. And Mr. Chair, I know that Robert referred to some changes that will have to be made into our official plan and zoning development bylaw. But if you remember the document that was passed by council in June or September of 2018, the City of Sheraton Affordable Housing Incentive Program, one of the recommendations, number one, it states, in an effort to recognize that property owners are converting residential housing stock and dwellings units into short-term rentals, i.e. Airbnbs, at an increasing rate, and therefore eliminating housing stock and or rental options, the City of Sheraton collaborate with the Assessment Division of the Province of Prince Edward Island to establish the commercial assessment value. So we have something, we have a recommendation in our affordable housing tax incentive that promotes short-term rentals. So I brought this to Robert's attention. I know Robert will follow up on it, that we have to amend that recommendation in our policy, because are we agreeing with it, or are we going to change it to reflect what we want to go forward with in 2022 and thereafter? So that's just a couple of points I wanted to make, because public record is very important at any legislative level, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, and I just want to make sure the record reflects changes that we have to make in our affordable housing tax and incentive, the public meetings, and I also want to say that the information, there's a lot of information, and if I look at the numbers that Robert provided here under legislative requirements, and this is the preamble not to support any grandfather, is that in 2021 there were 10 home occupation applications, and the department approved 6 of these applications as per the zoning development bylaw. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, but I thought the STR operators stated that 65 of their properties were registered. I'd like to find out if that was the case. And there was another point that Robert made. The Hotel Motel Association, I was told they were supporting STR operators, but this says it supports scenario 1. So we must have a letter to state, and Robert's bringing that up right now, that we have that in place. Do we have it? Again, I know a lot of questions, but under the SciPi, Tourism Industry Association of Prince Edward Island, are they supporting, are they supporting scenario 1, or are they just supporting an open concept? I'd like to find that out. And I think another organization that was brought to our attention, Discover Charlottetown. Where do they stand? So those are important groups that I'd like to hear from.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That was one question I had. And, the federal council's going ahead with this is that, council's going to have to wear a bunch of hats when we talk about this. From an economic perspective, this kind of hurts the city to some degree. But at the same time, we have an affordable housing crisis. So it's a very delicate topic. Right there, we hit it on it. Julie has said something on it, Councilor McCabe, and this is a decision that isn't going to be done here this evening. I think there's an awful lot more work has to be done. I do like Julie's idea, like the government working group. The mayor, you stated that as well. I think we need to really sit down with them and work and move forward with that. Because your heartstrings do pull a little bit for these folks that have been out and have bought some of these units and converted them, and even the thought of going back, they put so much money into them, they would never become affordable. So there's that aspect of it as well. That we, and that's what council style will be, is to take all those, there's always factors. Staff have done a well of the job, they must have been sleeping and eating this stuff. But at the end of the day, there is multiple factors that all have to come together to give staff the next step to go forward with implementation. So, is there, Councilor Yankoff, would you have your hand up?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
point of clarification.
Sure.
Just following up on some of the questions that you and the mayor had. So here on the screen I have the short-term rental public consultation.
Right.
The reason why I did not include that in the report was because the 5 scenarios weren't even created at this time. So I'll just quickly show you. Essentially what the June meeting was really just to show the existing regulations are, well, up here, we'll start off from the beginning. So here I took the PI population, I was showing the growth rate. Here I was showing the real estate housing prices.
Mm-hmm.
Here I was showing the rental markets, and this is the vacancy rate that was taken from CMHC, and it just shows kind of like the decreasing vacancy rate we had as we went along. I also displayed the construction stats. So I showed how basically we were at the high point of construction between 2009. We saw it slowly, steady decrease into 2010. It kept pretty relatively stable until 2012, and then it started to basically spiral down, and that was because of 2 things. Well, 3 things, sorry. One, we had capacity issues with our sewers, as well as a regional well capacity, and then we didn't have enough land zoned for multi-residential construction. So that's where we saw that dip. And what I was trying to show to the public was how we had a precipitous amount of growth, but we had a huge decrease or stall on actual construction. So it's like trying to dig out a hole, we're already 10 feet down. Then I show basically our population compared to overall growth, and that's growth in construction. So as you can see, we weren't even keeping up with the demand of the population, and this is why we're in a housing crunch that we are in right now. Then I defined what a short-term rental basically was. I defined and clearly stated that it's a home occupation through a tourist accommodation. I talked about principal residence requirement at that time. I said it can only be operated from a single detached dwelling, and at that time, and it still is, secondary garden suites were prohibited from being used for short-term rentals. Then I went into some of the regulatory frameworks, everything from the building code, municipal act, planning act, tourism act, and then of course the zoning bylaw. And then I kind of gave an overview of practices in other municipalities. We did have a survey that was done online, and that was kind of the response we received from the survey. So, but this was just generally speaking, looking at people's perspectives on short-term rentals. We didn't provide any options or scenarios with the proposed regulations. So because we didn't actually present any type of regulatory framework, I didn't want to include that in the report because, you know, we first approached the public with the scenarios was in May, and then we came with a formal recommendation in November. So I didn't really want to bog that down. The scenarios weren't actually created until February 2020, and that's the Professor Watson's report that the city contracted out. And so that is where he actually presented formally the 5 scenarios with an overview.
Yeah.
So that's why the June meeting wasn't included in the legislative requirements, because it wasn't legislative. I included the May meeting because we did have the scenarios at that time. That was the first time actually that staff approached the public to receive feedback on the scenarios. So that's to answer those questions in relation to why the June 19th meeting was included in the public consultation portion of the report. And then in regards to the Affordable Housing Incentive Program, that initial incentive program was done through the city manager's office, not in consultation with the planning department, and we don't deal with taxation rates or anything in that regard or that sense. So I would have to defer that question to Mr. Kelly.
So just quickly, Mr. Richard.
Yeah,
So at a March 9th meeting, 2020, 4 days before COVID-19 hit the world, we had 5 scenarios. We recommended the council was number 3. It was defeated not to go with 3 by a vote of 8-2. Councilors McLeod and Trio in favor of option 3, and then we went with option 4. Now, they probably came after our June 19th meeting of 2019, but that should be added into the record of the work and effort that's gone into, that we put into this whole issue of short-term rentals. That's the point I'm making. It should be included in the meetings that took place, because if we were educating or providing information or trying to get feedback, I think all three meetings represented one or two or three of those efforts.
Especially when you're talking going back to 2006, well then we need to, you're right, at least I do agree, this probably should have been included, in the report. That's my opinion, but, moving on, Councillor Yankoff, I think had a question first. Councillor McCabe for, Yankoff first, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Ann.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Robert, for your report. I don't know if I really have a question, maybe just a couple of comments. Is it possible to include any additional information into all of these documents that the mayor has pointed out that isn't in there just for historical purposes? And my other comment would be that I realize, as Rosemary said, this is a lot of information that we're absorbing again this evening, and I see it probably the sooner that we move this file forward to council, the more discussions that we can have, because we do have a responsibility to the public to continue moving this file to the next step. So those are just my comments. But the one question I did have, is it possible to put any missing historical information into the documents if in fact they're missing?
I'll let Alex answer that, Councillor Yankoff, if he's still there.
Yeah, no, I'm here, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we can do that, but I think it was just to follow up what Robert was indicating, and look, we can do whatever you so desire, but, this process got started, and we did have that initial public meeting, but the whole topic has evolved so much. We're trying to narrow the discussion. The more you open this up and people get confused at which meetings that we're at, whether they're at the 2019 meeting or the 2020 meeting or the 2021, or, it just gets complicated. And what we're trying to do, and then COVID hit. So COVID hit, took the air out of the balloon. All of the STR operators, the whole industry kind of collapsed at that time. So we can add in whatever you would so desire, but the issue is, to your point in regard to focusing the discussion on what's most relevant, but if you want the additional information in there, we can provide it.
Yeah. I think, Mr. Ferris, we should add, it was part of how we got where we are today, and I think it is important information that should be included. In your report. And as far as Councillor Yankoff's historic information, what's your thoughts there, Mr. Borges?
Well, again, in regard to the historic information, what exactly were you alluding to, Alana, in regard to what additional historic information were you looking for? And in regard to just the additional public meeting, or was there something additional?
Thank you, Chair. Can I direct my answer?
Yes, sure thing.
Yeah. It doesn't really change the fact where we're heading later on toward this evening with the staff's recommendation if the planning board so desires that. It's more so, it doesn't hurt to have all of the chronological order of everything that's happened. I think it helps to show the public that there has been a lot of work done on this file to why we've gotten to the information that we're where we are today, and it just reflects all the work that has been done on the file.
Yep, look, that's fine if the board would like us to pursue that. I'm sure Robert can amend his report before it gets to council. With the direction of the board, that the board just should provide staff some direction to add that additional information. Before it gets moves on to council, we should be able to put that in relatively quickly, and then so that depending on what you want to do this evening, that council will have it when it revives on their agenda.
Thank you very much, both Councillor and Mr. Forbes. Julie McCabe, Councillor McCabe, do you have a question?
Well, and I want to go back to also, Robert, thank you for the work on this file. We all know the great work you put in, and I think that definitely has to get to council. I guess for me right now, I'm still not sure where I sit, and when I read the resolution to get it to council, it says that I'm accepting staff's report, And I guess when I put in the chat with it, I had no problem with it going to say, can we discuss staff recommendation rather than approve staff's recommendation at this point. I still think there's some things that need to be ironed out. That's where I sit. But thank you for your work.
Okay, I think we need to, just put things in reverse there a little bit, Councilman McCabe. We've been pushing staff hard to give us a recommendation. And now we're saying we don't want any recommendation. So we have to kind of, unfortunately, process. So, and the process is that the staff does give a recommendation, and it's our job as a board to either agree or disagree. And
I think that's your discussion at council level anyway, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, just wanted to have more extensive conversations for sure. It's your right to say yes or no, and that's where we'll probably go this evening, and we'll let it go from there. So, any other questions, concerns, any of the other members? Anything they want to add, or if you're ready for a vote, feel free to put a motion on the floor. Mr. Mayor. You're on mute. Couldn't hear you.
No, I have a few more questions. Again, Mr. Chair, I've been bringing this up now for the last couple of years about the summary offense ticketing. I believe I sent a letter, an email to Alex Forbes. I think I CC'd it to David Hooley to find out what do we need to do, what's required under the Planning Act. Do we have to amend the Planning Act to insert a schedule of summary offense ticketing fines, or can we just do it on our own? So, like, we heard it at both the public information meeting that was held at the Confederation Center, May 17th, 2021, and we heard it again on November 9th, that if we're looking at a framework to regulate STRs, part of that framework must include summary offense ticketing, and that could spread out across all of our planning, zoning development activities, because how many times have we had someone come in and said, look, I didn't know I was not allowed to do it, but could you give me an exemption? So we have that summary offense ticketing in there. We can say, sorry, you did commit an offense, here's the ticket. So where are we at with the summary offense ticketing? Have we started with the province?
Well, I think, from a staff's perspective, and Alice can jump in after, that is part of the procedure moving forward. It's hard to put anything in place if they don't have the direction of council. So the first step will be for us as a council to give them direction, and in the months leading, that's part of the framework is to have that security side of all this put together. Alex, if you want to add a little more to that, you can, but I think I'm on the right path.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, in response to the mayor, we are working with our lawyers in regard to the summary conviction bylaw. It is a bylaw that will apply to the whole corporation. It's just not a planning, a conviction, and the penalties just dealing with STRs in it. But I think what we're hoping at this time, if we can get some clarity in regard to how you want to regulate this, we will then move into the discussion on the grace period. The grace period will be defined by council, but in light of the fact that this is my own personal opinion, if we're bumping up against the new season, which is April of 2022, we need to provide clarity to the industry this year, and then I envision, but I take direction from you folks, that you folks would tell us how you want us to regulate it under the zoning bylaw moving forward, and then you would say bring in the summary conviction bylaw and the registration bylaw with the fees by a specified date. I'm just throwing out, January of 2023 would be like an ideal date. That would give the industry some time to adjust. We would have some time to work the kinks out, but we would also be able to give clarity when people would be asking us for 2022, do I comply with the zoning regulations? And we would, if with your direction, that's what we need to answer, what the regulations, the zoning regulations will be moving forward. So your worship is correct in that there's still some work to be done on the summary conviction bylaw, but we do feel that we still have some time to bring that into force and effect once the date is determined on when the registration starts. But we need clarity in regard to how do we want to regulate this in 2022. This is this first part.
Okay. Right. So, point of clarification, Mr. Chair. So, Alex, we don't have to change the Planning Act. We don't have to go to the Legislative Assembly to make amendments to any act. We can do it in heads for summary offense ticket. That's what you're saying. I just want that 2 minutes.
Yeah, we have the ability. We have concerns with the some of the that section of the act could be potentially improved, the same as the Planning Act. But we have enough of a mechanism to move forward. I mean, you can always improve that, strengthen the provincial regulations, but we have the tools under the existing regulations to move forward to help to regulate this. But when we get further clarity from our lawyers, exactly under what sections, like if you violate the under the STR bylaw, what those summary conviction categories will be defined at that time.
And but with regard to what the mayor said, though, but the province will be involved with that as well, right?
Yeah, well, the province has those things laid out at this time. We may, as a part of this process, we may realize that we can still regulate this, but we may wish to have improvements. We can then, at that time, either through the Federation of PEI municipalities, request some changes. But that will be for everyone, not only the city of Charlottetown. If we find issues in there that we would like to provide to us as a municipality to help strengthen our ability to enforce any of our bylaws.
Okay. Good. You go with that, Mr. Mayor?
Well, he said may, so let's hope it's shall. We shall have the powers to do that. And Mr. Chair, if I can just go on to one other question. Robert said that we're planning to change a recommendation is to take the STR application to secondary apartments and garden suites. So if I own a duplex, can I rent out the other side as an STR? Robert? Did he leave us? He's on mute.
So through the chair to your worship, if you owned a duplex and you own both sides, you would have the ability to rent only or use only one of the sides for a short-term rental, since a duplex would be considered two individual, distinct dwelling units.
So my secondary apartment is not considered as my garden suite, part of my household?
Yeah, but there's a difference, your worship, from what a duplex is and what a secondary suite is. So a secondary suite can only occur in a single detached dwelling, right? A duplex is basically two dwelling units that are that are top to bottom, right? Side by side, semi-detached. So with the regulations as they're written and presented tonight, you can rent out a secondary suite, but again, a secondary suite is in a single detached dwelling only. If you owned a duplex and you owned both sides, you could only rent out the side in which your primary dwelling resides, where you reside most of the year.
And again, just quick clarification, two separate owners on both sides can rent them out as principal residents.
Correct. So if you had, two different ownerships, two different people, they could each rent out their side of their own individual unit. That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Good, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That's just a question today for me. So if you have a secondary suite and it has a kitchen in it, and you had mentioned about tourist home regulations that there would be you wouldn't be able to have cooking, like, there's only going to be breakfast in the morning, no food available for the rest of the day, but what happens if your unit is fully equipped?
So, Mr. Chair, the restriction on kitchen and cooking appliances are just relating to guest rooms. So you can't have like your own, and this is to satisfy fire code requirements where they want to avoid people putting hot plates in the room and burning the whole house down, right? So if you had a secondary suite, and a secondary suite does have a kitchen, does have a washing facility, it's an independent living unit, but it's, again, secondary to the primary unit being the single detached dwelling. So if someone were renting out their secondary suite, yes, they could use the kitchen, they just wouldn't be able to do any type of kitchen activities in their private bedrooms because that would not be compliant with fire and building codes.
Right. Okay. And one other question is on parking. So a garden suite right now, you need to have one parking spot, or its own driveway, am I correct?
You are correct.
Right. So if you now Airbnb it, or you turn it into a tourist home, then what happens? Then you need two more parking spots, or one?
So, Mr. Chair, what we would propose is that if you were offering a tourist home, you would need 2 spaces minimum, and that would be 2 spaces in total. The idea is that 1 space would be for the host operator, the person that's their primary dwelling unit, and then the second space would be for the guests or the party of guests. Because the regulations as they are today would allow for someone that owns a single detached dwelling with a secondary suite, they could rent out that secondary suite if they were present at time of stay. So basically, you would need 2 parking spots, one for the owner and then one for the guest or for the party of guests.
Okay, so I'm sorry to take up time, folks. So, but did you not tell me that we needed a driveway? It has to have its own entrance driveway.
Usually, in the bylaw, they would share their own entrance and driveway. The only thing, and actually, under the home occupation requirements, we allow for tandem parking. So you could park back to front, right? Under the secondary suite regulations of the bylaw today, you do need your own parking space for the secondary suite and then one for the principal unit. So those would be that would be non-tandem spaces, right? So that each person could get out without the other car moving. So the 2 spaces that we're just inserting in the zoning bylaw is just really to recognize what's required today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. Any other questions, concerns? What are we thinking? See everyone.
I'll move that we accept staff's recommendation forward to council.
We have a mover. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Seconded by, who was that, Mr. Kenny, was it?
Bobby?
Yeah, okay, Bobby, has, seconded that motion. All those in favor of, moving this with staff recommendation on to council, please put up your hand or indicate. All those in favor, okay, and those against? I don't see any. So, Ellen, you good there?
Yes. Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Rosemary,
Oh, yes,
if I could just suggest that we add, not we, Robert, I guess it would be, add a section, because I'm assuming that the documentation that goes to council is the document that we received today. Is that correct?
That, and I think we, staff had said that, on the mayor's recommendation that we add the first original public consultation report.
Yes.
Also
wondering if it mightn't be helpful to have kind of a couple of paragraphs that kind of explains the context. And like one of the main reasons that we get into this whole debate was around the need for housing, including affordable housing, but just particularly the need for housing in general. And then I think maybe we need to remind people about the number of short-term rental properties that there are in the city, how many of them have been unregulated, and just kind of give people that context, because everybody has so much information coming at them all the time that I think maybe that might be helpful for people when they're reviewing the more specific, detailed report that Robert has provided us with today.
Yeah, no, very good point, and I think that was the mayor's purpose of wanting to have the other part included, the historical side, just because council, part of their original decision was based on that report, and so that created supply of options. So, again, that's a good point. I think council needs a little introduction as well, so it would suit both public and council to have that little blurb put at the front of it saying, giving a little bit how we got where we are today.
Yeah, I think that would be, I think if I was on council, it would be helpful just to have a review with some of the main points and, things like the vacancy rates, what are they today, what have they been over the past few years, and then, the main messages that we got around, main messages I took away was the need for housing, the need for affordable housing, the need to maintain neighborhoods, respect neighborhoods, and then the other key message I think is looking at the good, how we can do the most good for the most people. As opposed to, maybe you might do a lot of good for just a few people, but how can we do the most good for the most people in Charlottetown?
Right. And point well taken, and it's something I referred to when I said council has to put on multiple hats when they discuss this. There's multiple factors here. There's the whole side of tax base. Do we want to stop promoting business? Do we want, if not, taxpayers are going to pay, right? So every time we do something to promote the city, it brings dollars into the city, and let's not forget, Airbnb does provide, if it's done correctly, it does provide, resources to the city. Like, the people probably wouldn't come if there wasn't an Airbnb available. That's just the way it is. They don't like hotels. So there is a part of the economic spin that Airbnbs do help. And some of the issues around affordable housing is, some of these homes were to the point where they weren't going to be able to have lived in, period. So what happens to those properties today if it wasn't an Airbnb today, where would those housings be? Where would they be today? Because some of them were derelict properties, right? So there's all that structure that council has to review. Besides, the information that came from a public meeting, there's all that other side of there's always 2 or 3 parts as to what council's role is in all this, and we have to take into account of all those factors. So it's going to be a big discussion.
And just wanted to point out too, I think Robert said that the group, the PEI Fight for Affordable Housing, I think maybe there were about 900 signatures on that petition.
It was 960, in 600 in Sheraton.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I have the report. I know Robert or Ellen emailed it to us, but Rosemary makes a very good point. This is all about affordable housing, and Rosemary, the FTA issue is one piece of the puzzle. We need more public investment from the provincial, federal government for social, affordable housing. And I think that was highlighted on November 9th at our meeting at the Confederation Center, is that this is one step of addressing the issue of affordable housing, but we need our other levels of government and the NGOs that are out there trying to make affordable housing available for as many as possible.
Good. Okay, sure. Thank you very much. Anything else, folks? I see none. We'll move on to introduction of new business. I don't think anything was added to the agenda. If not, I guess the last part of the evening is for adjournment. Do I have a mover? A seconder for that. So moved by Councilor McCabe, seconded by Chris Fournier. All those in favor of adjournment, please. It looks like it's pretty well set for unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy New Year.
All the best. Thank you very much. Good night.